Hey everybody, Krusty Old Crow here, and I just want to say hello to all new subscribers and all the original subscribers that have been with this channel for these last hundred some odd videos. Thanks again for helping us reach 150. This isn't the videos about the tactical perspective stuff where I do G.I. Joe Classified or talk about the Joe Market or any of that stuff or anything I feel like talking about with that is over there. This is the stuff I'm doing about the ADHD. This is Spinning Compass, episode 2, kind of 3, but 2. And therefore, I just want to warn you guys off. You won't be hearing, although you see them out there, any real relevant Joe stuff. So this is the point where you are more than invited to turn it off at this point, unless you're the one of the few people in my subscriber base that are curious about the ADHD stuff and the undiagnosed impacts of that and things like that. So give you a second to remember that I just said I'm not talking about G.I. Joe. I'm talking about some sensitive stuff that really, if it doesn't pertain to you, I mean, great, I'm happy for you. But if it does interest you in any way, then you're more than welcome to stick around and just understand the intent of this show. So, yeah, Krusty Old Crow. My name is Ryan. I went over in the first episode a bit about my background, the era I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and how we missed that window of childhood diagnosis being accurate, and therefore, and also the teachers in those eras not being prepared to deal with what was not known about ADHD at the time. And therefore, the struggles I had as a student and everything like that when I was a kid, and where it kind of led me to kind of run out of a few options. I talked about all that, and then why I embraced going to the military. There was a couple of reasons on there. One of them I focused on was a lack of options I had presented myself through almost like a hatred towards school because of what school was doing at the time to me and my self-confidence and my self-awareness and perception of who I was and where I stood amongst my peers. I was getting a very bad impression of who I was through teachers and things like that. So it was easier to ignore them by not embracing school, and that's exactly what happened. For this episode, like I said, guys, and you're free to like, share, subscribe if this is something that's interesting to you, or you have a family member that's going through this, or you suspect this could be pertaining to you and maybe you're undiagnosed. It's not something I'm trying to push and say, oh, because it happened to me, you should all get checked out. What I'm trying to say is when you don't get it checked out, or perhaps you refuse to because you suspect it and it'll complicate things, you miss learning some stuff that maybe sometimes makes it easier. So that's the intent of these videos, is to take the stuff I went through, the challenges I had to struggle through in the military trying to progress, and then when bam, I was like 45 or mid 40s when I got my ADHD diagnosis, and it was like notably noted as severe, not just common. I had to learn a lot more about it, as did the rest of my family, because we had a son who had that as well, and we learned a lot about these things and how they affected us. So guys, I'm going to remind you, I'm not a clinician, I'm a soldier. I'm a retired one at that, with a hobby on YouTube. Okay, but I invite you to learn all about this stuff. I'm going to show you a few slides. I'm going to explain a couple things, but it's really going to be like me talking about how some of these things that I was going through fall into the ADHD brain and all the executive functioning mind and how all that works out. I'm going to take a quick refill through that. But before I do, you see me as the crow. I'm talking to that cat, and you see how they're talking to the cat. The cat's looking away. Like that's something I got very used to as a kid with ADHD. I noticed when you had a lot to say, half the attention you got was divided. And, you notice that sort of stuff differently than people maybe without ADHD. And you tell yourself something to learn to accept that kind of stuff. That's why I'm used to rambling on, guys, but I'm very aware of it. It happens all the time in my G.I. Joe Classified show, Tactical Perspective. I ramble on, and I explain to guys there, I'm not medicated, and I don't hide from it. I think it's interesting, maybe to some people, to see it. It can be humorous at times and bumbling, and yeah, maybe I should be embarrassed of it, but I'm not. And I think that's why I'm doing these, like what the benefit it is of a guy like me doing a video like this is because I'm over that stuff. I can be honest about that stuff and not feel embarrassed about it. And if I tell you some of it, you might recognize some of it as well. And maybe that gets you thinking about that. And that's all I want to accomplish. So if it helps somebody, great. Recap, that was me back in the day, the guy wearing the sunglasses at the far end with the bomber jacket, and me and my friends back in high school. So just give you an idea of who I am. Squirrel. So how did that guy go on to be this guy? You know, when he talked about all that challenges and everything like that, that's what I explore, and what stood in my way from being more in the military, in my eyes. Okay. Before I carry on anymore, I'm going to get rid of my crow and I'm going to talk about Jessica. How to ADHD was one of the first YouTube videos I ever watched besides a Maple Leafs podcast, long before I got into toy collecting videos, watching those, because this was teaching us something. And the way she goes about it, she has 1.62 million subscribers, guys, and there's a good reason. I have not seen in a long time a person who is so natural at their subject matter that they speak of, and she is very raw, very honest. She doesn't do a one take like I do where you see all that, but she puts that in there. She shows you some of her confusion and the things that happen in the ADHD mind extremely well. If I can, I'll just like stop watching my video. If you really, really are interested in it, pause it, go watch her videos for a little while. She'll give you all the really big parts. Then come back if you're still interested in mine, right? I'll self-sabotage my videos. I don't mind. She's worthwhile. So I'm going to send a shout out to her, because when we were learning about our kid, and I was learning about myself, and my wife was learning about hers, there were times as a family, like, we'd have to pause the video and just emotionally absorb the things we were picking up and identifying with in Jessica's videos on how to ADHD. So again, I can't say enough praises about that. Like I said, I'll tag her and mention my appreciation, and that's the most I can do, right? If I'm going to mention her, that would be the respectful thing to do, is at least let her know I mentioned her. So guys, when you get into the way the brain works, especially with an ADHD mind, what we get into is some easy to read charts, actually, and they explain a lot of stuff. I'm just going to move the screen like that a bit. Maybe I'll find something to prop this up upon, just so that we have an easier time to read it, I think. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll just take this and we'll prop this up a little bit so we can see it. Okay. And then I'll come around and read it too. And what I'll do, guys, is just to move things along, as I do want to keep this under a half hour, is, guess who forgot to put a timer on? ADHD guy. Yay. I'm going to read it, and I'm just going to tell you, like, how I see it myself, kind of deal, or in my military career. Right? Last episode, I left you off. I had graduated. I was off the battle school and all that other stuff, and I was going to get to a regiment. And it's important I go over this before I start talking about what happens at a regiment. So there's your brain. And the pink part is your prefrontal cortex, all right? And it functions as an intersection for attention, behavior, and emotional responses. For people with ADHD, attention is switched easily. A good example of that would be distractions on a parade, when you start focusing in on how tired you become, and you're standing at attention on a military parade for up to an hour in the hot sun with all this hot wool or cotton gear on, and your attention starts to focus inwardly or off the ability to hold your body position, and you start to move around, and what comes from that is discipline. That sway of attention. That's just an example. There's so many. The limbic system is the area highlighted here in green, guys, and it regulates the emotions. A deficiency of dopamine in the ADHD limbic system may result in restlessness, inattention, or emotional volatility. Okay, so where I could see this falling in is in a classroom environment when the subject matter was dry and it couldn't draw my attention, and it was very easy to be for me to get distracted within my own inward conversations with myself, or pay attention to a doodle I was drawing on my page, or have a side discussion with somebody else who's trying to pay attention because I think they think like me. All that could fall in there. And emotional volatility is one of the areas I mentioned in my last video about this theoretical rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I think it falls a little bit in there as well. And that is something that I think has a lot to do with a lot of my problems with drinking, for one, that I had to go through my career. The basal ganglia, if I'm saying that right, that's the area highlighted here just below the limbic system, the neural circuit system that regulates communication with the brain. In the ADHD brain, a short circuit can cause inattention or impulsivity. Without going into a myriad of examples about that, right, one of the biggest things that was in my own way as far as acceptance within my squadrons, like at first in the military, was how impulsive I was. I was the guy that was blurting out stupid shit. I was the guy that would be quick to act without thinking, things like that. So that's where that would fall in the reticular activating system, or reticular activating system, pardon me, the major relay system between the brain's pathways. A dopamine deficiency may cause impulsivity and hyperactivity. Okay, so hyperactivity, that's my trigger word for what was being diagnosed to me in the 70s and 80s there. And that was what was the most understood piece of all this, and the kid that they saw back then by clinicians and social workers was hyperactivity. It was all about sugar, or it was put them on Ritalin, and we didn't know enough back then. So how that manifested in the military was my restlessness would often have me pacing around my room at night, looking for things to do in a very confined area on a base, right? So I was very bored very easily, looking for where I could go and socially interact. And in the base I got posted to in my first posting after basic training was a place called Petawawa, Ontario. And to leave my shack and find somewhere to be social, it was right outside our front gate. It was the bar scene. And this is often where that particular thing was leading me to, and that wasn't helping with the other issue of my coping mechanisms that came from the military career, and how drinking was going to affect that. Anyways, that's just my interpretation of this. I like this slide a lot because this helps me explain the difference between me and you. If you don't have ADHD, this just helps how the difference can be seen, right? So it says how to deal with an ADHD brain. We, in the negative sense, we're focusing on weaknesses and we're looking for threats, right? The discipline affects us a lot, and we have an issue with it. And confronting we seem confronting to what works for other people, because we are, right? Because our mind has already formed a different set of rules on how the world works based off how we've perceived it. Your structure, as you learned it, worked for you if you didn't have ADHD. It worked for a lot of other people, teachers and parents and churches and all that other stuff taught you a structure that you could absorb and understand quite easily, wherein the ADHD folk like myself perhaps struggled with that, and we had to adapt our understanding of it into our own idea of what works, right? We feel pressure very differently. It's probably going to lead to a lot of anxieties out of that for us. And I won't lie, I am an anxiety-driven guy. And being in the military did lead to circumstances where I did get operational stress injuries and eventually PTSD from them. Wasn't recognizing them because I was so used to being in an anxiety state already, socially. Right. So I found that funny, because what ended up happening is where I got a lot of my confidence as a soldier later, after quite a few years of being very unconfident, like no confidence, being almost forced out by my peers by just not being accepted, I got a lot of confidence on how I was with pressure when I was overseas and in a combat situation because my mind was used to functioning under that. So it's an example of where this disadvantage became an advantage in the military of all things, in all places. And guys, that's the thing, right? Like, I can tell you all these little tales to watch out for this and, oh, woe is me, this is how it affected me, but that's not the point. What I'm trying to say is if you get to know the ADHD a bit and understand how it affects you, you can actually spot out some differences and how it actually maybe benefits you. And there I have a few examples of how my ADHD did benefit me. It actually probably saved some friggin' lives overseas because I had ADHD, guys. So please take these videos for what they are, right? There's some other benefits. We find our own ways to do things. We have reward. We have a different concept to rewards. This can be good and bad, right? That dopamine area and everything like that. I don't think I'm putting the right interpretation of what we mean by it, but that right away triggers me. Like, yes, rewarding me is very important to myself, right? Self-rewarding myself as much as I can, right? Because I have issues regulating my emotions. So I find myself often feeling down, and rewarding me often shifts that mindset and challenges different neural pathways for me. Breaking down tasks. It's very important that I learn to break down tasks step by step. And the military was actually accommodating to that after they rewarded your potential with a leadership course and taught you how leaders plan things. That was important. It's called a primary leadership qualification, and that was a huge shift for me. Everything before that, you were supposed to be mentored by your peers and your chain of command, and that meant a lot of different things. It was all dependent on who you were working with and what their approach was. That's even harder when you're a problematic person that you don't know why you're behaving the way you are, and neither do they, and they don't have the patience or the time to understand it. They've got to push information, right? So breaking down tasks step by step, and the military way of learning certain classes in an environment, once I got to that regiment, became easier over time because I started to see the structure to it and I understood it. But they were by no means simple, but breaking them down piece by piece helped me learn those stages of things, and the struggle became how they added up and fit together sometimes. Focusing on strengths. Yeah, I am the kind of guy that will see the silver lining in everything, and I express that in my little side toy show sometimes on how I treat certain like the product I talk about in my hand. Sometimes I feel I express a bias by the way I try to focus on what it does bring to the table that benefits everyone, and maybe not so much on something deficient or problematic about the item that other people would get upset about, right? Encouragements, yeah, I can see two ways I do that. As a soldier, you love being encouraged by your peers and by your chain of command. It means you're doing your job right, and we really stress taking a pride in a job, right? Especially as soldiers. And for me, encouragement meant one of the few occasions I ever felt like I was doing something right at the time, right? I don't mean to be naysay, but as a kid, with it undiagnosed, and as a soldier with it undiagnosed at this time, I had no idea why I was having struggles. But when I received encouragement, my whole world would change for a little while, and I would actually feel confidence. It wouldn't happen very often, and that was always going to be a cycle that would affect me for a little while until I got that leadership course and I got some overseas experience with a different group of people than the ones I was getting exposed to right off the hop. So that was that slide. All right. Does ADHD show up in the brain? Apparently, psychologists can find to this. I'm just saying, like, this is once you start going down this rabbit hole, guys, there's a lot to learn about this subject, and it is kind of really an interesting dive. If you had it, if you know someone who has it, if you're dealing with it right now in your life, yeah, it's absolutely interesting. But if you're finding out about it years after you've done your career, let's say, or you're coming to the end of your career, and your career hasn't gone the way it did for others, and you're never understanding why, this is a roller coaster. This will mentally break you down in some ways because you'll see these missed opportunities. You'll see where things you were perceiving as how different they were, and you might start connecting them back down to your own actions and behaviors in a way that you weren't doing before. I'm a toy collector now. I was a soldier before. Why am I a toy collector? I think it's part because of the ADHD, because it's a form of escapism from reality a lot of the times. I started off as a toy collector as a kid. I think every kid did. If you're watching this video and you found me through my toy channel, you did too, probably. But that led to comics and tabletop gaming and hockey cards and other things. And now G.I. Joe, right? The problem is ADHD, we have impulsivity issues. And one of my impulsivity issues has always been clearly impulsive spending. It is something that I needed help with because it was very detrimental. The worse I felt, the more I needed to spend to get my dopamine release on how to feel better, right? If I wasn't going to get any encouragement from anyone else, and that was what was happening at the time, then I would get my dopamine releases through other things. Right, so I would spend beyond my reasonable means. To form a budget wasn't part of my process. Nobody ever really taught me that, for one, because I was pretty difficult to teach. And if they had taught me, it hadn't stuck at that point. Right, so I'm in the military, I'm making a regular fair paycheck, and I have impulsivity issues that I have no idea why they're there. I'm actually more bewildered on how people were able to save money. How did you resist all the tempting things your money could get you, like the new car, the new stereo, going out on nights on the town, new clothes, things like that, right? An ADHD mind like mine, that was a mystery. And so that's how you get soldiers who become things like administrative burdens, who chains of command have to come in and actually interrupt them, garnish their wages to pay back debts that this guy racked up because he can't. That never happened to me, but I mean, it would have had I not eventually met my wife and did the only smart thing I think I did back then was to concede absolute financial control of our household finances over to her and accept some form of budget from her. And throughout those years, guys, do you ever think I stuck to that budget? Of course not. My impulsivity always overrides. It does to this day. This is a problem we still have to this day. Have I been able to scale things down? Am I trying to get it dialed in? Absolutely. Right. But also remember, I'm doing these videos as a guy going without his medications, for which I was taking Adderall for ADHD, which was helping me maintain structure and focus in my life. So when you apply all this stuff and you see like all the areas that ADHD can affect you, when I talk about how it affects in a military career, I'm talking about learning structure, learning a new set of rules almost with every different position that you're doing, right? This threshold knowledge that you're supposed to maintain. And when you have a ADHD, sometimes you have no short-term memory, or sometimes you have no real good long-term memory. Sometimes it's a mix. It does affect memory and how you can access that. You got to look at what's big for me in the Army is hands-on and understanding path of flow. If you allow me to disassemble and put it back together like a puzzle and allow me to examine it from other angles, I'm going to learn it better. If you're teaching it in a classroom just through speaking with no visual examples, it's going to take longer, maybe longer than other guys. But understanding path of flow is meaning how every little thing makes something operate, right? All the functions. When you learn the path of flow of a combustion engine, for example, you can understand how cars work. When you understand how a gas operated weapon system works, and you can understand what certain immediate actions were required to control stoppages and put fire back down range in a firefight and things like that. When you teach a guy like me who's so visual, the path of flow charts often help. And once we learn a path of flow, for myself, that became a point of interest to approach every subject. That was my gateway to learn other things. The very first thing I talked to myself about after a class, if I didn't understand something, was about the path of flow. What did you learn first? What did you learn second? Why did you learn it? How do they connect? Okay, establish that. Because I wasn't picking that up when the class was being taught. My ADHD mind means I have to sit and ponder on things, and that isn't always going to be effective in the military. Sometimes that means you have to be retested in certain tests. I didn't have to do a lot of retesting, and I'm glad, because I don't think retesting was necessarily effective, right? It wasn't the same way it is when you're in school. It had detrimental effects on your grade. When you're retesting in the military, you've already been exposed kind of what the answers are, just giving you another chance to say them again. And you already learned you were wrong the first time. So of course we're going to focus on it and pass the next one, right? And then you move on. But comprehension is very different. When I pass a test where I'm just repeating what you told me, that's one thing. When I'm passing a test because I fully understand the subject matter, that's a completely different thing. And when you don't understand if you have ADHD, I can see how those lines, when they become blurred, become very confusing on your self-awareness on how you learn, right? And that can be problematic on what you think's wrong with you. Other people will tell you that's what's wrong with you. They'll believe it as well. And in the military, we just don't have time to go and tell everybody, hey, I want to get to know you better so I can understand the way you are. We have to function with what you get. You are a link in a chain. And if you're the weak link, either we replace you or you break. It's one or the other, right? I was very much a weak link when I joined the Army. My ADHD was very much, I'd say, at least 75% of the problem. The other 25% of the problem with my own silly attitude and a general lack of maturity. Did I get over it? Absolutely, I did. I'll talk about some strategies I used after I learned I had ADHD late in my career. But I will talk about where my ADHD also served me well. And I'll tell you some other stuff on another video. These videos are going to be about maybe once every week or two. They're not the same as my toy videos. My toy videos, I get excited and I get happy to do those, and passionate to a silly point. This one, I get a little introspective and a little, I wouldn't say shameful or emotional. That's not going to happen. Why do it if you're just going to sit there and blubber on camera? That's not it at all. It's easy to lose sight sometimes on this one. It's easy to lose sight on talking about ADHD when you have ADHD and you're not medicated for it, especially when it's severe. But I'm doing my best, and I think that's another benefit of the way I'm doing this video is you're seeing it all raw. You see where my attention shifts, and maybe that's relatable too. I like to think of myself, yeah, I used to be a soldier, and maybe I didn't even remind people of a soldier while I was a soldier because of who I was as a result of having ADHD. And I know there's some people that look back at who I was as very fondly. I'm not down on myself on all aspects of it. Neither should anyone else be, right? But I do these videos because I know what I went through once I found out about it, and I started applying it to what I understood my life to be at the time, how things were going, and where things needed to go after that. And it's so helpful, guys. It really was. So I'm going to end this by thanking you for today. I'm going to remind you, if this triggered anything that you want to look at even better, go check out How to ADHD with Jessica. Go there and just have a cup of coffee and just relax, because sometimes you need to be sitting down and going, oh my God, that's me. It's fun too, guys. Remember, learning things about this stuff can be fun if they're hitting you in the right spot. So I want to keep it hitting on the right spot. If you like this video, go ahead, hit like, subscribe, whatever. If I knew how to brand this differently, I would get it right off my own toy stuff, keep it separate, but it is what it is. But if you can think of a better way by sharing this in a certain group to get a viewership of people who maybe do want to see a video like this, please feel free to do all that. All right, and I will see you maybe in a week or two when I do another episode. All right, thanks for your time. Bye.